My name is Sarah Renaud, and I'm the Vice President of Consulting at ENCOR Advisors, and I am delighted to be your host here today. Our topic today is the state of digital infrastructure in Ontario. We are going to dive into the latest trends in the Ontario market and discuss how this compares to challenges and opportunities in the US. We're also going to explore the new phenomena of land power grabs that are happening globally to support hyperscale cloud and AI, to name but a few. And to cap it off, we are going to get a glimpse into the ecosystem of service offerings that are available from the major data center providers. I want to take this opportunity to welcome and thank each of our panelists that are joining us today. So perhaps your organization is just beginning its data center journey, has consciously embraced an on-premise or co-location model, or is refining its 5-year energy strategy based on additional data demands from the explosion of AI and enhanced security needs. Regardless of where you are in your journey, it is our goal today that you will leave this webinar with practical and tangible takeaways to apply to your own environment. Decisions around a cohesive data center approach is highly strategic. It can reduce costs, drive efficiency and profitability, promote enhanced security, and bolster the reputation of your company. Your approach to data management will also dramatically inform your core real estate strategy. And it is here where we see the merging of phygital, the digital world and the physical world. All right, let's meet our esteemed panelists. Philbert, please go ahead and introduce yourself and your organization.
Thanks, Sarah. Happy to be here. Based in Toronto. My name is Philbert Shih. I'm the founder and managing director of Structure Research. We're an independent research group focused on data center and hyperscale markets.
Excellent. Thank you. Rafal.
Hi there. You've got Rafal Rack here with Digital Realty, Vice President of the Americas portfolio for the Central US and Canada. Digital is the largest global data center operator. We support roughly 5,000 customers across 50 plus metros, across 6 continents, really catering to the any really in the industry vertical these days, from traditional enterprise customers to cloud computing, hybrid cloud, and most recently a lot of AI applications. That has been a major part of our demand profile for the past 12 to 18 months. And in Toronto, we have 3 locations. It's a major hub for us from an investment perspective, and we see a lot of potential in this market. We have a site downtown, and then 2 internet gate within the Internet Gateway, 151 Front Street, and then 2 suburban locations in Vaughan and Markham. Happy to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you. Todd, over to you.
All right. Thank you, and good morning. Happy to be here as well. So I'm Todd Smith. So I am the CTO of Transwestern Technology Properties Practice, one of the founding members. And my role is to help manage global resources required to provide advisory support and transaction support for end users making decisions about their data centers, whether they be on-premise, co-located, cloud, all of the above. Help drive strategy and make sure things are well aligned from an efficiency and compliance, security, everything required in that space. And we also support investors making decisions within the space. How to appropriately place money in investment, align that with both entry and exit strategies, as well as the operators themselves, who are essentially the vehicles for those investors to make good on those things. So our practice is really a 360 that gives us ongoing insight into a marketplace that we're going to talk about today that continues to change at an even more rapid pace. So very exciting, excited to be here, and we think the Canadian, the Ontario market in particular, are excellent marketplaces that we've had recent activity in, and very excited about expanding on that and working here with our Canadian partners.
This is great. Thank you to each of you again for being here with us today. ENCOR is truly excited about the opportunity to collaborate with the expertise around our meeting today. And let's dive into our first question. This one actually is directed to Philbert. What does the history of the Ontario market look like for data centers? And where are things headed from a supply standpoint?
Yeah, happy to try to address that. So, I've been following the sector for over 20 years, and that is about the kind of the lifespan of the kind of data center co-location industry. I think when you're thinking about Ontario, Toronto has always been the kind of hub, the main hub, the center of that industry. To kind of quickly kind of summarize what's happened in 20 odd years, a lot has happened. There have been a couple phases. I think that's the best way to think about the sector's history. Kind of the early phase, call it 10 years or so of the industry, like in many markets around the world, kind of born out of the telecom industry. The history in Toronto and Ontario has been Canadian companies or Canadian telecommunications providers, with the first kind of entrance into the space. They started to build up as the kind of the internet developed and online, activity and business applications started to move online. There was demand. Companies started to outsource instead of building their own on-premise data centers. And that kind of captured the first, a very Canadian market operated by Canadians, Canadian companies. That kind of captures the first kind of decade or so before the market started to consolidate a bit, started to see some outside investment. And then we started to see kind of U.S. Entities or capital coming in to support the market. And then we started to see, in the midst of that, the rise of public cloud in the U.S., which didn't really kind of cross the border, so to speak, maybe until the, mid to latter part of the previous decade, which really wasn't that long ago. I know we kind of think that's a lifetime ago, but it really wasn't. And in that time, the telecommunications providers that were in the space started to kind of consider exiting some of those assets. So there's been a lot of movement. Fast forward through kind of the hyperscale build out period, like I said, latter part of the decade through the pandemic till now, you really saw for the first time kind of the sector, you started to see Canadian companies adopt cloud. In Canada, there's been a history of kind of using cloud services south of the border, which is perfectly practical from a performance and latency perspective. But when it comes to security, compliance, data sovereignty, etc., things started to get a little complicated, and so you started to see public cloud build out in Canada, and so that kind of defines the last decade or not even decade. And I think what's really interesting for our kind of audience today, speaking about Ontario and Toronto in particular, is that the hyperscale public cloud build out actually happened in Canada first, in Quebec. So the hyperscalers landed in Montreal, in the greater Montreal area, due to the lower cost of power, primarily, and supported the first cloud build outs were done in that province. The kind of the movement of building out cloud infrastructure here in Toronto, in Ontario, is even of more recent vintage. So as kind of as these things, as infrastructure continue to mature, as performance becomes more important, became inevitable that you would have localized infrastructure here to serve end users with such a dense population. And so that's, a lot of moving parts, I know, and I didn't necessarily describe it in a complete chronological fashion. But think of the last decade as, defined by the hyperscale public cloud build out, by consolidation in the space, by the entry of U.S. operating companies and capital, with an aggressively lower cost of capital to support the infrastructure build out. It's a very, I would conclude by saying it's a young and emerging market. I think we've always been a little more conservative in terms of the IT culture here, the outsourcing culture. But the direction is forward, and I think we should fully expect to see that.
My next question over to Todd is to understand from your perspective, how does Transwestern work with and where you see comparisons in U.S. markets versus Canadian markets, in terms of the trends and where we are from a supply standpoint? So comparing kind of those two markets.
When I think about where we are, really echoing what Phil's saying, is that Ontario, really being the center of current growth, with it starting more so in Montreal. In past years, it makes sense, right? Toronto's a large MSA, it's a large financial hub, it's sort of the at the center of the Canadian economy. So things and investments are being built around that for a number of reasons, whether it be performance and latency, just the critical mass of business and in population. So it's following, as Phil would say, the same trends. The telecoms, ceding to more the infrastructure and third party carrier neutral properties. That's taken hold. Hyperscale development that's come in. So it's very similar. You could just maybe backtrack a few years to where you might see it in a market like a Dallas or a Chicago that is ahead on the development side, but the fundamentals are really holding. Recent projects that we've worked with in Canada, as well as in collaboration with our partners here, ENCOR, follow very similar principles. People are looking for quality facilities that can support their needs today with a horizon of 10 plus years. So some private company work, some government oriented work that we've done with Digital Realty and Rafal's team at the One Century facility have done some more cloud-based, NDR-based virtual work with companies like 1111 Systems that acquired sort of the remnants of SunGard after that bankruptcy. So the movements that we're seeing in the market, they do map well to what we see in the U.S. Our processes and how we support companies are very similar in that regard, in what's available. And we're seeing new entrants. You have your traditional players, well anchored U.S. companies, Digital, Equinix, and others. But Cologix, which has been a brand really Canadian rooted for quite a while, continues to invest. And we see other investment, Telehouse coming in, buying up the more carrier central network assets. These are important movements, things to keep eyes on for current tenants and people that are moving in there. Significant investment. The Fingate investment with East Structure, I mean, that's interesting and shows the continuation of domestic only growth as well. So it's not purely international investment that's coming in, but largely so with the cloud hubs and availability zones from the major players. So exciting market. I do agree with Phil that, and like I did say, is it's a bit behind, but it feels like it's catching up quickly, and that the dynamics will continue to be robust. It's going to give lots of options to Canadian companies to continue with their strategies. In data sovereignty, we've seen it on multiple projects. Some data just simply cannot leave the Canadian border, and so this infrastructure is critical. And I think people have seen that, the investors have seen that, and we'll see how the government and everyone else can embrace the needs that are coming with extreme power use, and why that is important to the economy, the local economy, that the data center community actually be supported and not seen as a menace of power consumption.
I wanted to turn it over to Rafal now, and if you could speak to this question under the context of One Century and the market opportunity for future growth as it relates to that opportunity in particular.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to. I think we've hit up on the fundamentals of why Toronto's been such a successful market and continues to be a market that we're excited about. Just from a location perspective, the economy of that particular market, just the amount of major, being a major telecom infrastructure hub, home to major media and software, companies, and most recently, as we talked about, kind of the adoption of cloud infrastructure, and now most recently hybrid cloud infrastructure that we're excited about and have been successful in many of the other major U.S. markets and European markets, where we have customers that are looking for a true hybrid approach. They don't want to put all their applications into the public cloud. Some of those applications are best suited on-prem within a third-party data center, and having the ability to connect back to that public cloud infrastructure. And part of our value prop that's been successful in other major markets is having not only the data center space and the capacity, but making sure that we have a presence within a internet gateway hub like a 151 Front Street, and providing the interconnection solution in that particular asset, having the availability and connection to a public on-ramp and cloud infrastructure within a dense network ecosystem like a 151, and then providing that customer kind of a seamless approach to be able to expand and grow with us in a market like in Somerville, like Markham, and that provides expansion and scalability and higher density applications that they can utilize within that building. And our growth at 151 has been an indication, really have been moving along with the growth of Toronto. Our customer base is larger scale, larger footprint takedowns. Those commitments have continued to grow in size. What used to be we'd get excited about a 500 kW or 1 megawatt deal in any major market, 10, 15 years ago. Those continue to ratchet up. And Toronto, we still haven't seen sort of that demand profile like we currently are seeing with some of the AI applications in use, where you're seeing 50 megawatt requirements, 100 megawatt requirements, takedowns. Getting to that next phase and next level of commitment. You're still seeing, on the smaller scale side in the 4 to 6 megawatt range. But you're seeing it kind of ramp up quickly, and the conversations continue to evolve. And with an asset like 151 Front Street, our goal is always to have capacity for our customers to grow and be able to grow with them. And out in 151, we have 16 megawatts of additional capacity that we're building, and we plan to continue to bring best capacity online in that market, because we do see the trend here that it's gonna start looking like a Chicago and a Virginia here pretty quickly, in terms of the applications that need a home here eventually in the Toronto market.
No, that's great. Thank you. And that really brings me to question number 2. And thank you for that, Rafal. So wanting to understand what demand has been like in recent years, and how has COVID, AI, and other trends impacted the Ontario landscape as it speaks to the need for such incoming supply. So each of you have touched upon, the electrical grid capacity and very infrastructure needs that are really tailored and unique to each prospective client, and then obviously government policy. But I wanted to hear from each of you around, what types of clients now, Rafal, are you focusing on, and what are some of their current and anticipated needs looking like? You spoke to that a bit earlier. I wonder if you could build upon that.
Yeah, sure. So with a market like Toronto, it has a lot of similarities with a market like Chicago, not just from a geographical perspective, but if you look at the companies that are based in Toronto, there's a lot of financial service companies similar to Chicago. You have software companies, and it's a pretty broad range of industries that are based in a market like Chicago, similar to Toronto. So when we look at the overall demand profile and how do we stand out from other providers that are out there, we want to make sure that we can accommodate that full spectrum of customer demand. And so if it's a customer that's looking for 20 kW or a couple of cabinets, more of an enterprise customer or a startup that's looking to build up their platform, we have the ability to accommodate that through our service platform and through our operational platform that we have set up to be able to accommodate that colo application and having the full spectrum product offering, and being able to expand and grow with that company, and being able to also accommodate the cloud companies that are looking to expand in this particular market for the cloud services that they offer to companies based in Canada or in Toronto specifically, and having that scalability so that they can connect to those companies within the same ecosystem or within our same platform. So it's really been a broad spectrum of companies that we've been able to accommodate, and that's in our sort of demand pipeline that we're looking at today. It's definitely not at the scale if you look at a market like, especially recently, or Chicago or Dallas, Santa Clara or Northern Virginia the top 4 or 5 markets in the U.S. Definitely have a much larger, robust pipeline. In just as a point point of reference, if we're looking at like today, just recently was looking at kind of in preparation for this call, looking at our demand pipeline for Toronto versus a market like a Chicago or Dallas. The pipeline in those markets is about 8 or 9 times higher than it is in Toronto. A lot of that is weighted by obviously larger scale opportunities that are in that larger KW range to kind of throw off the numbers a bit. But if you look back 5 years ago, 6 years ago at a market like a Dallas or Chicago, it's on par with what you're seeing today in Toronto. So definitely kind of the theme as we've been talking about today is the trend in Toronto and kind of the history here and how it's evolved and how it's continuing to evolve. And it's, from a timing perspective, it has the feel, and kind of if you look at all these other markets in the US, the major hubs, it's about 4 or 5 years behind. So definitely gets you excited about where this market is going if it continues this trajectory based on where a similar market like a Chicago was 5 years ago to where it is today.
No, that's really insightful to hear that too, to talk about the potential and the opportunity within the local markets. It's excellent. Todd, from your perspective, can you talk about the enterprise needs and the shift of the world of data centers to a land power grab that's happening globally, that's supporting hyperscale, cloud, AI, and what may be to come, quantum by example?
No, great. Thank you. The world, we talked a little bit about COVID before, right? So, when we were sort of entering into COVID, so talk about, 2019, 20, and, really a lot of the shutdowns in actual production of materials, everything from transformers to generators, all the components that we need in the data center space, also affected, grid capacity, the actual electrical capacity that the data center industry relies upon. So I think to kind of think about it from an enterprise standpoint and, the whole ecosystem that supports, the digital economy that we are now, to kind of go a little bit big picture, the government policies that were enacted during COVID, various forms of lockdown measures, where, a lot of people were simply just working from home. We had the ability to do it with the digital infrastructure that we had, number one, in many cases, but it was still very disruptive in terms of actual production of items. So, a lot of money being produced, to keep the economies going, really, from a government monetary policy standpoint, but the production not really being there. So these supply chain issues were significant. We're still feeling that in across the entire, what it takes to build properties, to actually put the facilities in play for IT infrastructure to sit and serve the applications, right? So that ecosystem was highly disrupted. At the same time, what tends to happen in IT at the application level is we can always dream of what it can be, right? We can go back and look at, Twilight Zone from the 60s or whatever we may see. We can always have that imagination of the sci-fi, right? Well, when you start getting chips that come out like these NVIDIA GPU chips, that have driven so much AI, it's now possible. Now what I could dream of, I could actually do that. I have the horsepower and the engine to do that in a manner that the economics match. So trying to deploy these chips, the amount of power, the amount of cooling that it takes, a lot of the current data center infrastructure, even if you have to retrofit that to handle these sorts of dense loads, heat and power in small spaces, simply not there. So from a development standpoint, what we're looking at is, hey, how do we bring on not tens of megawatts online, which, used to be a significant presence to start a campus that Digital or some of their competitors would start. Now we're moving the decimal point. If we're not talking in the hundreds, we're not talking hyperscale. It doesn't matter, right? We actually have people that are talking in now the gigawatts, right? And then, we've talked a little bit. I'm here in Texas. I'm dealing a lot in the Dallas market, for example, and the backlog is over 20 gigawatts right now, just for the data center industry in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro. That's about 20% of the total capacity of the entire state of Texas. It has right at 30 million people population-wise, and a tremendous amount of economy. So, where we're going now is thinking about energy policy, right? You've had green energy. We're trying to reduce carbon emissions on a global basis. So when you're talking about things like solar and wind, and hydro, these have been very popular sources of energy. But are they capable of providing the stability to hit the numbers that we're talking about right here? And I think in most cases, the answer is no, it's not. Okay, so how will government policy on a state, a province, a nation basis actually adjust to this? Who's going to embrace the ability to provide this in that source of energy, which is semi-clean compared to, I think people agree coal is very high emission, is natural gas. And so we're seeing natural gas being embraced as a solution in the data center industry, yet as a prime source to actually provide power to develop these campuses over the next few years, and including talking about nuclear investments as the long-range plan, since nuclear is a net zero from an actual emissions standpoint. So that energy conversation is huge. Land that has energy for development is really where things are moving. And it's an exciting time. And the question really is going to be what's coming behind AI. AI will continue. There'll be winners and losers in that space, depending upon who's deploying this and what the end user use of those applications is going to be. But you referenced quantum computing. Quantum computing is a whole nother ballgame. And I think it's going to hit us sooner or later. It's going to be a major impact. It's going to be very disruptive in the data center industry and very established companies like Digital. These are tough conversations being had in these boardrooms and being had within the investment community about, how do we make our numbers today? How do we provide supply over the next 2, 3, 4 years? How do we lock down this demand in a very competitive market? But how do we have a 10-year plan? Because without that 10-year plan, these markets like Toronto, you're going to see areas where the stars don't align. The business is going to have to go somewhere else by necessity. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out and the decisions being made. And we're very excited. The data center industry used to just rely on grid capacity primarily. Those days have now been flipped upside down, and energy people are coming in, and real estate people are becoming more predominant on the land side. So exciting times ahead.
Absolutely. Yes. Again, lots of opportunity, but lots of things to think about too, which brings me over to Philbert from a strategy standpoint, from a global leader in this space in terms of research. Can you speak to the demand forecast from Structure Research's perspective?
Yeah, and great comments from Todd and Rafal. And I think I'll try to kind of aggregate some of those thoughts and provide kind of a big picture perspective on where we're seeing demand headed. I think one of the most interesting things about the demand for data center capacity, co-location capacity, and cloud infrastructure is that it's multifaceted. It's coming from different directions, and it's also kind of interdependent on each other. And so what I mean by that is that you're seeing kind of organizations decide how they're going to build their infrastructure. They may decide to run that on a public cloud platform. They may do that exclusively. Born on the cloud startups, kind of a phrase that kind of a demographic that we've heard of. That in turn, when a company decides to do that, that public cloud infrastructure may reside in a Digital Realty data center co-location facility, and they may, and drive kind of interconnection uptake within those facilities. So there's kind of a spin-off effect from the demand. And so I think that's one kind of interesting dynamic to think about, is that, cloud growth drives data center co-location and interconnection growth, as well as companies, within the just kind of the broader kind of landscape, deciding how they're going to deploy and procure their infrastructure. And so I think, cloud is obviously public cloud is one of the big drivers, but there has been, since the birth of the industry, this kind of gradual incremental move from on-premise traditional data centers to co-location environments. Some of these facilities are now older. The process of moving has been, like I described, it's something that was happening 20 years ago, and some observers of the sector, including myself, are always surprised at how kind of slow that has kind of transpired, how there are still a lot of legacy infrastructure out there, and how that occupies, part of the demand, not all, but a portion of the demand profile. I think Rafal has probably saw that this morning when he was looking at, some of the opportunities that are out there. Some of them are net new, like AI companies that Todd mentioned. Some of them are, around public cloud infrastructure, hyperscalers, but also just kind of traditional deployments looking to transform, looking to modernize. And, that usually means it's going to head in this sector's direction. So it could end up on a public cloud platform. It could land in a private cloud or some kind of managed infrastructure environment run by a service provider. That service provider, many service providers also use the likes of data center co-location providers to run their infrastructure. So it's very much an ecosystem, and the demand that comes into this ecosystem, drives certain companies' kind of top line revenue. But there is that spin-off effect and impact for all those involved. And so, yeah, I would say that, there has been kind of this steady. I think what's very interesting about this sector is that demand is never really kind of oscillates too heavily. There's been that kind of steady. It is this kind of long-term migration from traditional to modern cloud-based infrastructure that's been happening. That's been, of course, supercharged in some cases by public cloud, and now what we're seeing around AI. But I would, if you put that all together, I think you have, what is a very kind of healthy demand profile, and one that is, I would also say, that is very stable, in that, there's not too much that could kind of knock it off course, right? In fact, I would leave you with the thought that in the sector's history, disruptive events have actually tended to have the opposite effect. They have actually kind of sparked growth in the industry. And I'll point you to the three that we often think of. One, the dot-com bubble, a little longer ago, kind of gave birth to the industry. I just aged myself. The 2008-9 financial crisis, which kind of kicked off public cloud adoption, knowledge and awareness, and then, of course, uptake and growth, which drove kind of the last decade's growth, expansion in not just public cloud infrastructure and data center co-location. And, of course, the COVID-19, the global pandemic, which sparked a surge in online activity across life and business, which, of course, in turn drove demand for infrastructure. So yeah, that's another way of saying that I don't see the demand tapering. You're going to have your ebbs and flows, but I think the trajectory is forward. It's not, I'll make the Canadian reference here. It's not quite hockey stick growth, but think of it as a steady forward upward direction.
Yes, I think it's really interesting the way you've cited sort of the phases of growth based on what's happening globally and with economies locally, internationally. Definitely the intersection of digital commerce and the rise of, on-demand everything because of COVID. And I think that's really informing business strategy for a lot of companies. So you're seeing, a different narrative play out in the strategy and growth plans of companies, because now they have copious amounts of data, both for the day-to-day transactions, but also with AI. And a lot of companies too are wanting to kind of, capture that AI internally in best practices with their company and store that somewhere. So it's also bringing in a real estate conversation in a different way than we may not have in prior years. So it's definitely an exciting time in terms of the intersection of all this. And I agree with you, the demand definitely is going to continue to go upwards. Perhaps the hockey stick growth in the next 5 years, perhaps, maybe not today, but all right, we're on to our third question now. So along with Digital Realty, who have been the major players in the overall development of data center services in Ontario, and what are customers of these providers seeking? I'm going to turn this over to Todd to address first, to talk about any recent projects and project provider types and what the overall landscape looks like in terms of capacity and the service modules that these providers are providing to customers.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so really piggybacking on what we talked about before. I mean, the market's seeing a lot of investment. I think Rafal was kind of dead on. We could probably peg this to 5 years ago, and with Rafal talking about kind of looking at the macro of their own pipelines, that makes sense. And is a real good bellwether, digital as being, the largest landlord in the space and a traditional provider that goes way back, in continuing to make investments that we know are based upon real conditions in the market. So to me, I'm a big reader of earnings reports for the public companies, and I do read digitals because I think it's very important. When you talk about, the other larger companies in the space, Equinix has made a lot of investments. We talked about Telehouse coming in and buying those highly connected carrier hotel assets. I'm sure was quite a bid process involved in that, and their peers, took a look, I'm sure as well. We look at some of these other companies, when you think about Compass Stack Infrastructure, I mean, there are newer providers that, don't have as long a legacy in the space, that, are coming in and doing things that tend to be, sort of the rise of single tenant campuses to serve hyperscale. We see that on a global basis. I've seen it in Latin America and some recent trips that we're working with Structure on, where, hey, the entire project may be master planned for one single client. And that's a good marriage in the space of what we've seen. When we go back 10 years ago, when everybody could see the writing on the wall that a lot of enterprises were going to start aggressively using public cloud services, there was always the question: is this going to wipe out CyrusOne, Digital Realty, QTS? Are they just going to get hammered and be in real jeopardy? And the only thing that had to be answered to that was were data center companies going to be making the right land, power, development investments ahead of the curve? Because the hyperscalers themselves do have a mixed strategy. A Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Oracle, they can build their own, and they do. But they are not afraid to use the right partners and the right ecosystem of people that can execute. So that's what we're seeing. I mean, you're seeing that happening in Ontario. It is matching what we see throughout the rest of the world. But the thing that I what we'll see with the Toronto market in particular, and some of the other Canadian markets, is that nice hybridized ecosystem. Customers having options, right? So when we've run recent projects on the Toronto MSA, we've had options, right? It's not like, hey, we've got to play chicken with this one provider. There are multiple providers that do have capacity, particularly from a retail standpoint. So right now, and I see the same thing in the US, if we have a project that needs 50, 100, 200, 300 kW, we can fulfill that. That's not going to be a problem. But when you start talking about 3, 6, 10, 12, 30 megawatts that need to be provided in how quick can you get it? This is where the industry is running into major issues, major constraints. How are we actually going to provide these things? You're even seeing the supply chain, NVIDIA themselves stepping in and say, how can we take control of this? Because we can't make money if these chips can't be deployed. People won't buy them if it doesn't exist. So it's a very interesting mash of things that's going on. And something that Phil was really speaking to before, about people embracing public cloud and doing that. We see a hybridization effect, right? I will say that the days of the option of, hey, I'm going to go build my own sub-megawatt private data center, the economics and really the ability to service what you're doing, that model rarely makes sense at this point. So it's been dying very quickly, and people have been moving out of those kind of facilities. So building at scale, really, we only see that being a hyperscale doing that, if they're going to do that for themselves. But that ecosystem of support, we've talked about hybrid IT. We see cloud repatriation as well, where somebody has gone very hard in a direction with an Amazon Web Services, and they've realized that operating expense is just way off the chart, higher than they thought. And they got to figure out how to reel that back in. One way to do that would be to repatriate into a facility. Talking in Ontario, a One Century would be a great place to do that, because you're not going to probably repatriate from the cloud 100% of what you're doing. You may keep 30, 40, 50% of that. What better place to go into than a third-party data center these are the type of things we advise on, to go in and set up shop with your own capital, your own infrastructure, really optimize how you're doing that and tie in to all of those cloud and software as a service providers that you can get at a 151 front, or that you can get at a 1 Century, right? Or if you need higher touch, there are companies out there providing more higher touch services that may be clients and tenants of Digital Realty, or may have their own spaces as well. All of that's existing right now within the Toronto market. I would say right now it's still a retail buyer's market, and the wholesale and where we're going from an AI, very large deployments, these things are going to have to be sorted out, and that's a more complicated situation.
Great. Thank you, Todd. That's really insightful. Philbert, over to you from a research perspective. Can you speak to any new projects that have been announced in this space?
Yeah. We've got I think you've seen some of the slides, the audience kind of where data centers, are clustered around the GTA. I think what's very interesting is that there are some hyperscale projects that are basically land acquisitions, and then will be self-built or built by the hyperscale company themselves, alongside the many expansions and projects that data center co-location operators are undertaking. I don't know if there's any there are any specific project. I think it's what's very kind of what speaks to the health in the space is that all of the operators we've mentioned, and maybe some we have not mentioned, are actively building out capacity. They're actively kind of working with their clients to understand their expansion requirements. And the forward planning horizon, I think is you've seen this in the US, and now in Canada, you're starting to see the planning horizon extend, especially for the large deployments. So, what hyperscalers might have thought, in a 2 to 5 year increment, they're now looking at 5 to 10, even further out. So I think those that dynamic is present across the sector. I'd say, as I mentioned, I think most operators have some kind of expansion strategy in place and in process. I would think the additional comment I'd add is that what is going to come around AI, at least in Toronto and in Ontario, I think is a little more TBD. I think Rafal mentioned some of the big requirements you're seeing in the US, and I think he referenced about what he's seen historically, professionally, he's seen about 3 to 5 year time lag. I think that's fair. I think, if you think about how long it took hyperscale and public cloud infrastructure to land in Canada, it was actually almost a decade. If you mark kind of say 2016 in Canada and about 2006-07 in the US, which are roughly the dates. And so, but I think the time lag the delay will be faster, I think, in this environment with the technology we're talking about. So yeah, I think that will be what's happening. I mean, companies are thinking about it now. And as the calendar kind of continues to move forward, I think you'll start to see some of that movement, and that will spark more projects. Again, a lot of these things are not necessarily, cranes and, breaking ground ceremonies and things like that. A lot of it is, as Todd referenced, behind the scenes work on procuring land and energy in the quantities that will be sufficient for the workloads that are coming.
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting facet too, is making sure that we have enough physical land to house all this new development that's happening. And we've talked a lot about comparisons between Canada and the US. How would you say Canada versus globally? Are we, where are we in terms of as a global player relative to other developments out there?
Yeah, I think Canada sits somewhere, and I'll just reference Canada rather than just Toronto or Ontario. Kind of sits somewhere in the middle. I think that's always been, unique about about this kind of internet economy. I think some quick data points. Todd referenced 30 million Texans. There are only about 35 million Canadians. I think it's 70 million Californians. So you think about a large landmass, but not a densely populated country. And so, yeah, there are only a certain amount of major metros in the country. And a lot of those major metros, of course, drive kind of the internet connectivity, and then, of course, compute and storage infrastructure. So I always explain to our client base that, Canada seems to be somewhat in the middle, somewhat a bit less conservative, a bit less aggressive in terms of new technology adoption that you see, or outsourcing adoption that you see south of the border in the US, but perhaps maybe a little more aggressive and a little less conservative than you see in some places like Europe. A market like Germany is a very large market, but one that is very hands-on, very conservative, and has a lot of kind of traditional infrastructure. An interesting global reference I like is Australia, very far from here. A large landmass as well, maybe not as cold, but also a similar population size, right? So I think also around 35, 37 million people in Australia. So very comparable. But there, if you look at the numbers, and we have some of these numbers, happy to share, if people are interested. But there, the data center market is larger, has more capacity built out, has been more forward thinking in terms of outsourced infrastructure and cloud adoption. And that's just kind of an interesting, there are obviously a lot of reasons that we could, take too long to get into today. But kind of just speak to where Canada compares to some different parts of the world. There are different drivers, of course. But it is, I think, a market that has, again, kind of coming back to that theme, traditionally been a bit more conservative. But if you think about that and you think about where trends are happening, where the world is going, the interdependence with the US economy, you've got to think that there's a lot of upside that just hasn't been tapped into.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just getting started, which is really the exciting part to it all. Rafal, I want to take our third question over to you for an opportunity to respond and to understand from a digital realty perspective, what service offerings are available on your campus offerings?
Sure. So what we focus on really, whether it's a market like Toronto or any market really globally, is really selling the globe. And we've got 300 data centers, healthy land bank and development pipeline in almost every major market, including Toronto, and really trying to offer the full spectrum of product and connectivity offerings where our customers kind of deploy an initial footprint. And as their business scales and requires, diversification in terms of regional diversification or physical diversification, whether it's in a market or in another market, we cater to provide that flexibility and ease to do that. And as much as possible, try to make it seamless by providing the ability to interconnect these facilities, provide them access to major internet, connection points, the on-ramps. And really we do that through our service fabric, which is a single interface application that provides our customers the full spectrum of either a regional ecosystem, a larger ecosystem within a larger sort of overall region in a particular area, and try to create really this marketplace and a dense ecosystem where, the social medias, the gamings, the financial services, all these companies that are based in these major hubs and major markets like a Toronto can interconnect with other companies that they do business with, and the network service providers and the cloud companies to run their applications smoother, faster, better. That's really what we try to, sell. And in any major sort of market, in terms of, if you look at a Chicago, you look at, even other major sort of global markets like a Singapore or Paris or out in Germany, where we've got deployments, or the UK, we deploy a hub and spoke sort of design, try to provide customers that have sort of that latency sensitive applications needing to be connected or have a presence in an initial gateway, like a 151 Front Street in Toronto, the ability to grow and scale and expand their compute and storage needs in the suburbs, all connected via one sort of metro ecosystem. And I believe, when you look at the overall globe and overall offering that's out there in terms of third-party providers, I think we have a sort of a unique value proposition to our customers that can provide that sort of not just regionally or in a particular market like the U.S. You can provide that, globally across all the major metros and continuing to sell that, and that's been successful with our customer base.
And do you see an uptake on any specific industry, or do you see demand across all verticals?
It's really been across all verticals. I mean, obviously the size range of the deployments, they're heavily weighted towards the AI applications. The hyperscalers, the cloud companies continue to take large blocks of capacity, but we're also seeing a trend even on the traditional co-location side, where you see, enterprise customers, whether it's financials, like I mentioned, gaming, social media, sort of the networks that continue to need to expand their capacity to accommodate all this growth. You're seeing those requirements grow in size and in density. We've been talking about, obviously, the densification of the industry for a very long time, right? I've been with digital for close to 13 years now, and even in the early days, when we were deploying our customers, we were deploying in 4 kW cabinet range or 3 kW cabinet range. Every conversation was, we need 10 kW cabinet. And you saw maybe a little bit of an increase in that densification from 3 to 4 to 5 kW cabinet, 6 kW cabinet today. It's definitely lagging in terms of where the expectation is versus the reality. But today those densities are, in terms of the conversations that we're talking about, even on the co-location, smaller footprint size, and not true AI applications, they're looking for 15, 20 kW a cabinet, in terms of, how their, servers are, capacity that they're running all those servers are growing. So, definitely a trend in the higher deal size range, even on the smaller enterprise requirements. And definitely, higher densification, and those is kind of what we've been seeing lately.
Great advice. Thank you, everyone. This really brings us to the conclusion of our webinar today. I just want to remind our audience that, again, today's session has been recorded, and we will follow up with the show notes, the details of this recording, along with white papers and further information to connect with each of our panelists today. And ENCOR Advisors is thrilled to be able to launch this series at the core and to launch our consulting service solutions that provides access to partners and to resources like Transwestern, Digital Realty, and Structure Research. So again, you can find further information at our website at www.encoradvisors.com. And please stay tuned for future webinars around key topics that touch upon people, process, and technology within the corporate real estate space. So again, a huge thank you to our panelists today and to our audience for joining us, and stay tuned for our next session. Take care and all the best.